he felt it before he understood it. The Korean Mafia boss stopped walking, not because of the armed men behind him, but because of the little girl in front of him. She looked up slowly, calm, unafraid. And that's when it hit him. She had his eyes. The same cold gaze. The same quiet fearlessness. His chest tightened, not from guilt, but from the sudden realization that someone had protected her from a world that would destroy her. The black woman beside the child tightened her grip on the girl's shoulder, not in fear of him, but in fear of what would happen once he realized the truth. Because somewhere in the city, someone else was already searching for a child who was never supposed to exist. I ruled Seoul's underworld with nothing but silence and blood. My name was Kang Minho, and when people heard it, they either bowed or disappeared. The Korean Mafia boss title wasn't just a name, it was a warning carved into every dark corner of this city. I controlled shipping routes that governments pretended not to see. I owned buildings where businessmen signed contracts during the day while my soldiers counted untraceable money at night. Power wasn't something I chased anymore. It followed me like a shadow, waiting for my next command. But power in the mafia world always came with a price written in enemy's blood. That night, I just walked out of a meeting where I'd ordered the execution of a rival's lieutenant. No hesitation. No second thoughts. That's how survival worked when you were the boss. You eliminated threats before they eliminated you. The man who showed weakness was the man who died screaming in a warehouse nobody would ever find. My security moved around me like a machine built for killing. 6 men, all trained to die for me because I paid better than death. We walked through the empty parking garage beneath my building, our footsteps echoing off concrete walls like drumbeats. This was my kingdom, cold, efficient, and absolutely under my control. The shipment from Busan arrives Thursday, my second in command, Jae-sung said. His voice was low, careful. The Russians are getting impatient about the delay. Let them be impatient, I replied, my tone flat. Impatient men make mistakes. Men who make mistakes give me leverage. Men who give me leverage don't live long enough to complain about delays. That's when everything stopped. A woman stood between 2 cars about 20 meters ahead, half hidden in the shadows where the overhead lights couldn't quite reach. But it wasn't her that made my blood freeze. It was the small child holding her hand, a little girl who couldn't have been older than 5, standing in a place where children should never, ever be. My hand moved automatically to the gun under my jacket. Every one of my men immediately formed a protective circle, weapons drawn and ready. This parking garage was supposed to be impenetrable. No one got in without clearance. No one surprised a Korean mafia boss in his own territory and lived to talk about it. Identify yourself now, Jae-sung barked, his pistol aimed directly at the woman's chest. His finger was already on the trigger. One wrong move and she'd be dead before she hit the ground. The woman didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't even blink. She just stood there, perfectly still, her body positioned protectively between my soldiers and the child. Even in the dim light, I could see her stance, feet planted, weight balanced, ready to move. This wasn't some lost civilian who'd wandered into danger. This was someone who knew exactly what kind of danger she'd walked into and didn't care. But the child looked up at me with eyes that made my heart stop beating. Dark, almost black. Set in a small face that mixed Asian features with African heritage in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Because those eyes weren't just similar to mine. They were identical. The exact same shape. The exact same cold, calculating stare. The exact same fearlessness that I'd spent 38 years building through violence and survival. She had his eyes. my eyes staring back at me from a face that was half mine and half someone I'd tried to forget. "Lower your weapons," I heard myself say. The words came out hoarse, unfamiliar. "Boss, we don't know who," Jae-sung started. I said, "Lower them." "Now." My men hesitated. In our world, hesitation meant death. Unknown people in secure locations meant assassination attempts. Variables you couldn't control meant you ended up in a grave. But something in my voice, something broken and sharp, made them obey even though confusion radiated from them like heat. I stepped closer, my pulse doing something it hadn't done in years. It was racing. Actually racing like I was afraid, except I hadn't been afraid of anything since I was 15 years old and killed my first man. The woman's hand tightened on the child's shoulder, but she didn't move backward. Didn't run. Didn't beg for mercy. That's when I saw her face clearly under the light. Recognition hit me like a bullet to the spine. Simone. The black woman bodyguard I'd hired 6 years ago when a rival faction had gotten too close to me. The woman who'd taken 3 bullets meant for my chest and didn't cry once while the doctor dug them out. The woman who'd disappeared without explanation the morning after I'd broken my most important rule and touched her. "Hello, Minho," she said quietly. Her American accent cut through the Korean night like a knife through silk. "I wasn't planning for you to see us like this." The little girl tilted her head slightly, studying me with an expression I'd seen in mirrors my entire life. She was calculating, measuring, deciding whether I was a threat to be feared or a tool to be used. My daughter was analyzing me the same way I analyzed enemies. Who else knows about her? The question came out like gravel, automatic and cold. Because in the Mafia world where I'd built my empire, information was more valuable than gold. And this information, that Seoul's most feared Korean Mafia boss had a hidden daughter walking around with his eyes, was worth enough to destroy everything I'd spent 2 decades building. Simone moved like death in human form. I'd forgotten that about her, the way she could be perfectly still 1 second and absolutely lethal the next. As my men escorted us toward the elevator, she positioned herself between them and the child with the kind of efficiency that only came from years of keeping someone small and precious alive in a world designed to kill them. The black woman bodyguard I'd known 6 years ago had been impressive. She'd been trained by American Special Forces, moved through combat zones like other people walked through parks. But this woman, this mother standing in front of me, was something completely different. Harder. More focused. Every single muscle in her body was coiled like a weapon waiting for an excuse to be deployed. "Don't touch her," Simone said quietly when Jae-sung reached toward the child to guide her into the elevator. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. But I heard the promise underneath those words as clearly as if she'd screamed it. "Touch my daughter, and I will kill you where you stand. Rank and guns be damned." Jae-sung pulled his hand back fast, glancing at me for direction. I gave him a slight nod. He was smart enough to know that testing a mother protecting her child was a suicide mission, especially when that mother had been trained to eliminate high-value targets without leaving evidence. Inside the elevator, Simone kept the child behind her, one hand resting protectively on the small shoulder while her eyes tracked every single movement my men made. She wasn't impressed by my power. Wasn't intimidated by the guns or the reputation or the empire I'd built on other people's fear. She looked at us exactly as we were potential threats to be neutralized if they made one wrong move toward her daughter. I caught myself staring at her, remembering things I'd spent 6 years trying to burn out of my memory. The way she'd moved through my penthouse that first month, checking security with cold professional detachment. The way her dark skin had looked against my white sheets the one night I'd let my guard down and allowed myself to be something other than a Korean Mafia boss. The way she disappeared without a word the next morning, leaving nothing but a resignation letter and questions I'd refused to let myself ask. "You look thinner," I said, breaking the heavy silence that pressed down on all of us. "Raising a daughter alone will do that to you," she replied without looking at me. "Especially when you're hiding from a Korean mafia boss who can never know she exists." The child, I still didn't know her name, pressed closer to Simone's leg. Not from fear, I realized as I watched her. From strategy. She was using her mother as cover, maintaining tactical advantage even though she was only 5 years old. My daughter had inherited more than just my eyes. She'd inherited my survival instincts, my ability to assess danger and position herself accordingly. We reached my penthouse in complete silence. My men swept the entire space, checking for threats that couldn't possibly be there. It was standard procedure, but Simone watched them work with a professional eye, cataloging their movements, identifying their weaknesses and blind spots. Those were old habits from her bodyguard days, when staying alert meant staying alive and missing one detail meant dying badly. "Leave us," I ordered once the security sweep was complete. Jae-sung hesitated, his hand still near his weapon. "Boss, protocol says we should have at least 2 men inside. She's not going to kill me." I looked directly at Simone. "Are you?" "Not unless you give me a reason to," she said with that same terrifying calm. "And definitely not in front of my daughter." My daughter. Hearing those words out loud felt like being stabbed. I'd never planned on having children. In my world, children were liabilities that got you killed. They were targets that enemies used to break men who couldn't be broken any other way. They were weaknesses that turned powerful bosses into desperate fools who'd trade empires for one more day with their kids. But here she stood anyway. This impossibly small human who shared my DNA, watching me with eyes that understood far too much for someone who should still believe in fairy tales and happy endings. After my men finally left, Simone relaxed slightly, though her hand never moved far from the child's shoulder. "Coming back to Seoul was a mistake," she said quietly. "But I ran out of options." "Options for what?" "Survival. Someone found us in Los Angeles 3 weeks ago. I don't know who sent them, but they knew to look for a black woman with a mixed-race daughter who has very specific eyes." "That's too precise to be coincidence, Minho." Cold dread settled into my stomach like poison. If someone had connected this child to me, if someone in the mafia world knew I had a hidden daughter, then every enemy I'd ever made had just been handed the ultimate weapon. One child who has his eyes, and suddenly the most feared Korean mafia boss in Seoul had a weakness that could never be hidden again. "What's her name?" I asked. I couldn't stop myself from looking at her, this little girl who carried my genetics in her bones. "Jia," Simone answered. "Jiamin." "I gave her your family name even though I knew it was dangerous. She deserved to carry some part of you, even if she could never know you existed." Jia. The name was perfectly Korean, traditional and strong. Looking at this child who was half mine and half the black woman I'd spent 6 years trying to forget, the name fit in a way that made my chest hurt. She had Simone's rich dark skin and full lips, but my straight black hair and those eyes, those cold, calculating eyes that marked her as my daughter more clearly than any paternity test ever could. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harsher than I meant it to. 6 years, Simone. 6 years you kept her hidden like some kind of secret that would destroy the world if anyone knew. "Because you're a Korean mafia boss," she said, meeting my stare without flinching. "Because your world kills children just to send messages to their fathers. Because love is the most dangerous weakness a man like you can have, and I watched you sacrifice anything and anyone who made you weak. What kind of mother would I be if I brought our daughter into that? If you're hooked by this story, Hit that subscribe button right now. We drop dark romance stories like this every week that'll keep you up at night. 6 years vanished like smoke the second I saw Simone again. But the real story, the story of how she disappeared and why I'd let her go, was written in choices I'd made back when power mattered more than anything else in the world. More than loyalty. More than connection. More than the black woman who'd taken bullets for me and never asked for anything in return. I remembered the night she'd resigned like it was yesterday. It had been spring in Seoul, with cherry blossoms falling past my office windows like pink snow. Simone had walked in wearing that professional mask she always wore, the expression that said she was a bodyguard first, second, and forever. Never a woman. Never someone who might want something beyond a paycheck and a clear exit strategy. "I'm leaving," she'd said. Just like that. No explanation. No emotion. Just a simple statement of fact delivered in that calm American accent. Why? I'd asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. Because 3 weeks before that conversation, I'd broken the most important rule I had. I'd touched her. I'd allowed myself one single night of being something other than a Korean mafia boss who calculated every move 3 steps ahead. One night where she wasn't my employee and I wasn't her employer. Just 2 people who'd been circling each other's gravity for 6 months, pretending the pull wasn't there. Because staying would be a mistake, she'd answered simply, "For both of us." And she'd been right, of course. In the mafia world where I'd built my empire, caring about someone was exactly the same as signing their death warrant in your own blood. My enemies watched me constantly, studied my patterns, looked for any weakness they could exploit to bring me down. A lover was leverage. A partner was a target painted on someone's back. And Simone, strong, capable, beautiful Simone, would have been marked for torture and death the exact second anyone realized she mattered to me. So I'd let her go, paid her the full severance she'd earned. Watched her walk out of my building and out of my life without once asking her to stay. Because that's what survival in the mafia world demanded. You cut away anything soft before your enemies could use it to gut you like a fish. But I'd thought about her. Late at night when the violence and strategy and endless power games finally went quiet for a few hours, I'd wondered where she'd gone. If she'd found other work protecting other powerful people. If she'd thought about our night together, or if she'd just filed it away as another mistake in a career full of calculated risks. I'd never imagined, not even once, that she'd disappeared because she was pregnant. That one night had created a consequence neither of us had planned for. A daughter. My daughter. Hidden for years after I'd erased Simone from my life and convinced myself that was the merciful choice. "When did you know?" I asked now, watching Gia explore my penthouse with careful, quiet movements. Even her curiosity was controlled and strategic. She touched nothing unless she looked at it first from multiple angles. She made no unnecessary sound. She was already learning that invisibility meant safety in a dangerous world. 2 months after I left Seoul, Simone said. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit by the city's neon glow. I was in Los Angeles by then, working private security for a tech CEO who didn't ask questions. Found out at a free clinic in Koreatown, which felt ironic. And you decided not to tell me. I decided not to condemn my child to being leverage against a mafia boss, she corrected sharply. There's a difference, Minho. You think I didn't want to call you? Didn't want to show up at your door and demand you acknowledge what we'd created? But I'd spent 6 months watching how your world operates. I'd seen what happens to people you care about. She was right. Years after years, I'd watched rival families use loved ones as weapons. Children kidnapped and returned in pieces as warnings. Wives executed in public to send messages. Parents tortured for information about their sons' criminal operations. The Mafia families that controlled Seoul's underworld understood perfectly that the fastest way to destroy a powerful man was through the people he loved. "So you raised her alone," I said. "I raised her alive," Simone replied. That was the only thing that mattered. Gia wandered over to my bookshelf, her small fingers trailing along the spines. She pulled out a book about military strategy, Sun Tzu's Art of War in the original Chinese, and looked at me with those eyes that mirrored mine. She didn't ask permission out loud, just waited silently for my response. "You can read it if you want," I said. My voice came out softer than I'd intended. She didn't smile, just nodded once and carried the book to an oversized chair, settling in with the kind of focused stillness that made her seem decades older than 5. How many hours had she spent being this quiet? Being this invisible? Learning that survival meant never drawing attention to yourself because attention could get your mother killed? "She doesn't talk much," Simone said, following my gaze. "She learned early that silence keeps you safe when you're always running from something." Running from what? From you at first. From anyone who might see her face and recognize those eyes. From the possibility that someone would connect her to Korea's most feared mafia boss and decide she was worth more as a hostage than as a living child. She paused. And then later, we were running from whoever started following us in Los Angeles. Someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think happens next. Your engagement helps us create more stories like this one. Gia didn't sleep that first night. At midnight, I found her standing by the penthouse windows, her small hands pressed flat against the glass, watching Seoul's light spread out below like stars that had fallen to earth. She'd changed into pajamas that Simone had pulled from a worn backpack, cheap cotton with faded cartoon characters, the kind you bought at discount stores when money was tight and survival mattered more than comfort. My daughter was poor. The thought hit me like a physical blow to the chest. While I'd been sleeping on sheets that cost more than most people's monthly salary, while I'd been building an empire worth hundreds of millions, my own child had been wearing discount pajamas and learning to stay quiet because silence meant safety. "Can't sleep?" I asked, keeping my distance. I didn't know how to approach a child. Had never needed to learn. In my world, children were abstract concepts. Future soldiers. Potential leverage. Not actual small humans with complicated emotions and needs I couldn't meet with money or violence. She turned to look at me, and there it was again. Those eyes. My eyes staring back at me from a face that was far too young to already look that old. She studied me the exact same way I studied potential threats, calculating value and danger in a single glance, deciding whether to trust or defend. "Mom says you're my father," Gia said finally. Her English carried a slight American accent, but underneath I could hear careful pronunciation, like she'd been taught to speak clearly in case she needed to be understood during an emergency. I confirmed. I didn't know what else to say. "Why didn't you want me?" The question was delivered without emotion, like she was asking about the weather or what time it was. But I heard the weight underneath those simple words. 5 years of growing up without a father. 5 years of watching other kids get picked up by 2 parents while she only had one. 5 years of understanding that she existed in secret because her very existence was too dangerous to acknowledge. "I didn't know about you," I said. If I had, I stopped. What would I have done? Brought her into my world of violence and constant danger? Kept her hidden anyway because that was safer? I genuinely didn't know. Couldn't know. Gia tilted her head in that gesture I was beginning to recognize as pure calculation. "Mom says you're a bad man. That you hurt people for money and power. Your mother's right. But you're helping us now. Yes. Why? If you're bad, why help? Because she has his eyes, I almost said. Because looking at her feels like looking at a part of myself I thought I'd successfully killed years ago. Because she's living proof that one night 6 years ago, I was human instead of a monster, and that humanity created something worth protecting even if I don't know how. Because you're mine, I said instead. And I protect what's mine. That's how the Mafia world works. She considered this seriously, her expression thoughtful in a way that no 5-year-olds should be. Then she turned back to the window. The city's pretty at night. In Los Angeles, we lived in a neighborhood where you couldn't see any lights. Mom said staying in the dark kept us safe from people looking for us. Years of hiding. Years of poverty. Years of teaching my daughter that her existence was something shameful, that her father was too dangerous to know, that love was a luxury she couldn't afford because survival had to come first. Gia, I said, testing her name. It felt right in my mouth, Korean syllables for a child who was half mine and half the black woman I'd tried so hard to forget. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? Mom's face, she answered immediately. Except for the eyes. The eyes are always different. Do you know why they're different? Because they're yours. She looked at me again, and I saw the recognition click into place. She'd spent 5 years looking at her own reflection and seeing a stranger's eyes looking back at her. Now, standing across from me, she finally understood where those eyes had come from. We have the same eyes. She had his eyes. It wasn't just about physical appearance anymore. It was about the way she assessed threats. The way she stayed calm when most children would cry or scream. The way she'd already learned that showing emotion was weakness and staying silent was strength. My daughter had inherited my survival instincts, my cold calculation, my absolute refusal to show fear even when fear was the only logical response. And that terrified me more than any enemy I'd ever faced in 2 decades of Mafia violence. Does it hurt? Gia asked suddenly. Does what hurt? Being bad. Mom says bad people turn off the parts of themselves that feel things. She says they have to stop feeling so they can do terrible things without guilt. Did you turn off your feelings? I'd spent 38 years building walls inside my mind, cutting away empathy like dead tissue, learning to order executions over breakfast without losing my appetite. Watching people die and feeling nothing except strategic satisfaction that another threat had been eliminated. Yes, I'd turned off my feelings. That's what being a Korean Mafia boss required, the ability to be absolutely ruthless without any remorse. But looking at Jian now, at my daughter asking questions that shouldn't come from someone so young, I felt something crack in those carefully built walls. Something dangerous and painful and entirely incompatible with the life I'd built. If this story is hitting you in the feels, smash that like button. It helps us know what content you want more of. Morning came with Simone's voice cutting through my thoughts like a blade. I hadn't slept at all, spent the entire night making phone calls, activating intelligence networks, trying to identify who'd found them in Los Angeles and why. The black woman bodyguard sat across from me now in the cold morning light, coffee in her hands, ready to explain years of impossible choices I'd never understood. You want to know why I ran, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Yes. Then let me tell you exactly what it's like being pregnant by a Korean Mafia boss who doesn't do family or feelings. She set down the coffee cup with careful control. I found out 2 months after I left Seoul. Sat in that free clinic in Koreatown, staring at a positive pregnancy test, and the very first thought I had wasn't happiness or excitement. It was pure terror. I said nothing, just listened as she unpacked 5 years of survival decisions I'd never been part of. I'd spent 6 months working for you, Minho. Watched how you operated every single day. Saw the bodies that disappeared into warehouses and never came back out. Heard the screams from that building you thought I didn't know about. I understood exactly what kind of man you were, the kind who built an empire on other people's fear and pain. The kind who'd sacrifice anything, including people he claimed to care about, for power and control. I never claimed to care about anyone, I said quietly. Exactly. And that's precisely why I knew that telling you about the pregnancy would be the worst mistake of my life. She leaned forward, her expression hard. You want to know what I imagined? I imagined you seeing Gia as nothing but a liability. A weakness your enemies could exploit to bring you down. I imagined you either forcing me to terminate the pregnancy or taking the baby the second she was born and hiding her somewhere I could never find her. Because that's what powerful men do when faced with consequences they didn't plan for. They eliminate the problem. You don't know what I would have done. Don't I? Her voice was sharp now. You ordered 3 executions the month before I left. 3 of your own soldiers, Minho. You killed them specifically because they'd gotten families that made them vulnerable. Because they'd started caring more about their wives and children than about your orders. You eliminated them because family made them weak, and weakness in the Mafia world gets you killed. What was I supposed to think? The memory came back clearly. 3 men who'd let personal connections compromise their operational security. I'd killed them not out of cruelty, but out of cold necessity. In the Mafia world I controlled, family was leverage that enemies used against you. Love was a weakness that got exploited. Caring about someone more than the organization was the same as betrayal. So I ran, Simone continued. Took the severance money you'd given me and disappeared into Los Angeles. Found work doing private security for wealthy people who didn't ask uncomfortable questions about my past. Saved every single dollar I could because I absolutely knew, that raising a child alone meant poverty and sacrifice and giving up any hope of the comfortable life I might have had. You chose poverty over telling me. I chose survival over telling you. There's a massive difference. She stood up, paced to the window where Gia had stood hours earlier. Do you have any idea what it's like? Raising a child who looks exactly like you? Who has those distinctive eyes that everyone in Seoul would recognize instantly if they saw her face? I couldn't take her to Korean neighborhoods or restaurants. Couldn't risk anyone seeing her and asking questions. Couldn't even let her hair grow out long because the straight black texture made her Asian heritage too obvious and identifiable. She was crying now, not loudly, just tears tracking slowly down her dark skin. I cut my daughter's hair short her entire life, Minho. Kept it cropped like a boy's until she was old. Enough to start crying about looking different from other girls at her school. Then I had to sit her down and explain why. Had to tell my 5-year-old daughter that looking pretty wasn't safe for her. That being visible and memorable meant being targeted. That her father was such a dangerous monster that she could never, ever let anyone know she existed. Do you understand what that does to a mother? Having to hide your own child's face because her father is too powerful and too feared for her to safely acknowledge. I felt something cold and sharp settle into my chest. You cut her hair to hide her. Every few months for 5 years. Kept it short and practical until she finally broke down sobbing, begging me to let her look like the other girls in her class. Then I had to choose between her happiness and her safety, and survival won every single time because that's what being her mother meant. Keeping her alive mattered more than keeping her happy. Simone turned to face me fully. So yes, Minho, I ran from you. I hid our daughter from you. I chose years of poverty and fear and loneliness over bringing her into your world. Because in the Mafia world you control, love is the most dangerous weakness anyone can have. And I loved her too much to make her your weakness. I controlled criminal operations in 3 countries. I made decisions that moved millions of dollars and ended human lives with a single phone call. I'd built an entire empire on strategic thinking and absolute ruthlessness that never hesitated or second-guessed. But I couldn't control one 5-year-old girl who had his eyes. Gia sat across from me at breakfast, eating rice and vegetables with the kind of careful efficiency that spoke of years learning never to waste food. She didn't ask for seconds, didn't complain about anything, just ate exactly what was placed in front of her and watched me with those eyes that mirrored mine, constantly assessing and calculating what kind of threat I represented to her survival. "Do you like the food?" I asked, gesturing at the elaborate Korean breakfast my private chef had prepared. I didn't know what children ate, had never needed to learn. So I just ordered what I normally ate and hoped that would work. "It's good," she said simply. Then, after a careful pause, "We usually eat cereal for breakfast. The kind that comes in big bags from discount stores because it's cheaper. Mom says being efficient with money is how you survive when you don't have much." My daughter had been eating discount cereal from bulk bags, while I'd been dining on food prepared by a chef who charged more per hour than most people made in a day. Gia had been learning that efficiency mattered more than taste. That cheap was better than expensive. That wanting more than the absolute basics for survival was a dangerous luxury she couldn't afford. "You can eat whatever you want here," I said. "Anything at all. Just tell me and I'll have it prepared. Mom says we're not staying long enough for preferences to matter. Maybe you'll stay longer than currently planned." Gia tilted her head in that gesture I was rapidly learning to recognize as pure calculation. "Why would we stay? You don't really want us here. Mom doesn't want to be here. We're only here because running away stopped working and she ran out of other options for keeping us safe." 5 years old and already cutting through every pretense to identify the core truth of any situation. My daughter had inherited far more than just my eyes. She'd inherited my ability to see through manipulation and politics to identify people's real motivations underneath all the performance. "What makes you think I don't want you here?" I asked carefully. "Because wanting us would mean changing who you are. Mom says powerful people never change because changing means admitting they were wrong about something. And being wrong means showing weakness. And showing weakness in your world means being dead." Simone had taught her well. Too well, maybe. Gia talked about survival and power dynamics like they were simple, obvious facts instead of complex realities that most adults never fully understood. She learned all the rules of my world without ever actually living in it, prepared for dangers she should never have to comprehend. "Your mother is a very smart woman," I said. "But is she right about you?" The question was delivered simply, but it cut straight to the heart of everything. Was Simone right that I couldn't change? That being a Korean Mafia boss for 2 decades had permanently destroyed whatever capacity for normal human emotion I might have once possessed? That looking at my daughter and feeling something crack inside me wasn't actually enough to transform who I fundamentally was? "I don't know," I admitted. That was probably the most honest thing I'd said in years. Gia nodded slowly, accepting this uncertainty without judgment. "Mom says not knowing is always better than lying to yourself. She says you should never lie about what you can and can't do because self-deception gets you killed faster than enemy action ever will. Your mother taught you a lot about survival." She had to. We were always running from something. The simple statement hit me harder than it should have. Always running. 5 years of my daughter's life spent constantly looking over her shoulder, learning to disappear, understanding that stability and safety were luxuries she couldn't afford because her father was too dangerous to acknowledge. For the first time in decades, I felt something that might have been guilt. Not for the violence I'd committed in building my empire. That was just business, strategy, necessary elimination of threats. but for the indirect violence I'd inflicted on this child who'd never even met me. For being the kind of man whose very existence had turned my daughter's entire life into one long escape. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. Jia looked genuinely surprised. "For what?" "For being the reason you had to run. For being too dangerous to know. For making your mother choose between poverty and bringing you into my world of violence." She considered this apology with the seriousness of a diplomat evaluating a peace treaty between warring nations. Then, Mom says sorry doesn't actually fix anything. She says only actions fix things. So are you going to fix it, or are you just saying words? I don't know if I can fix it. Then maybe don't say sorry yet. Wait until you know whether you can actually fix things. Otherwise, it's just empty words that don't mean anything. Comment below and let me know if you think a mafia boss can actually change for his daughter. I love reading your theories and perspectives. The external threat entered my life exactly 3 days after Jia and Simone arrived. I was in a meeting with my financial advisors when Jae-sung burst through the door without knocking, something he'd never done in 10 years of service. His face was pale, which meant whatever news he carried was bad enough to override every protocol we had. "Boss, we have a serious problem," he said, slightly out of breath. "The Choi family knows." Everything inside me went cold. The Choi family controlled the southern ports and had been looking for leverage against me for 5 years. They were ruthless, strategic, and absolutely without mercy when they identified weakness in their enemies. If they knew about Jia, about my daughter, who has his eyes, then they'd already started planning how to use her. "How?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Park Sung-min, one of the men who saw them in the parking garage 3 nights ago. The choice got to him somehow, offered him money or threatened his family. He told them everything, the black woman, the child, the eyes. They know she's yours, Minho." I felt rage building inside my chest like a fire that would consume everything if I let it. Park Sung-min was a soldier I'd trusted, a man I'd promoted twice, someone I'd believed was loyal. And he'd sold information about my daughter to my worst enemies for whatever price they'd offered. Where is he now? Already disappeared. Probably in a choice-safe house by now, under their protection. "Find him," I said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone understood what that meant. Find him and make an example that anyone who even thinks about my daughter will regret for the last few minutes of their life. "Boss, if we move against him, the choice will know we're taking this seriously. It confirms, I don't care what it confirms." The words came out like gunshots. Someone threatened my daughter. Someone thought they could use a 5-year-old child as leverage in their pathetic power games. I want Park Sung-min found, and I want everyone in this city to understand what happens when you make me choose between politics and protection. Jae-sung nodded and left immediately. The financial advisors sat frozen, having just witnessed something they'd never seen before, their boss losing absolute control over his emotions because of a child he'd known existed for less than a week. I found Simone in the training room she'd claimed as her own, running through combat drills with an intensity that made it clear she already knew something was wrong. The black woman bodyguard moved like violence waiting to happen, every motion precise and lethal. "The Choi family knows about Jia," I said without preamble. She stopped mid-strike, her body going absolutely still. "How?" "One of my men sold the information. He's being handled." "Handled means killed." "Yes." Simone turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before: fear. Not for herself. For our daughter. The mafia world you control just became the danger I spent 5 years running from. This is exactly why I never told you, Minho. This is exactly why keeping her hidden was the only option that kept her breathing. I'll protect her. How? By surrounding her with armed men for the rest of her life? By turning her childhood into a military operation? by teaching her that being your daughter means living in constant fear of being kidnapped or killed to hurt you. She wasn't wrong. The Choi family wouldn't move against Jia directly. That would start a war neither side could win. But they'd wait. Watch. Look for the perfect moment when security slipped or when I was distracted. Then they'd take my daughter and use her to destroy everything I'd built. We need to move her, Simone said, already thinking tactically. Somewhere the choice can't reach. Maybe back to America, different city, new identities for both of us. No. Minho, I said no. Running didn't work in Los Angeles, and it won't work now. The Choice have resources in every major city. They'll find you again, and next time I won't be here to stand between them and Jia. So, what's your solution? Keep her here in the middle of a mafia war zone. My solution is making it absolutely clear that touching my daughter means total destruction. Not just death. Not just retaliation. Complete annihilation of everyone involved and everyone they've ever cared about. Simone stared at me. You're talking about starting a war. I'm talking about ending one before it begins. The Choice need to understand that Jia isn't leverage. She's a line that can't be crossed without consequences that make death look merciful. And if they cross it anyway, then I burn their entire organization to the ground and salt the earth where it stood. For the first time since she'd returned, Simone looked at me like I was the monster she'd spent 5 years telling Jia about. This is who you are. This is why I ran. You can't solve everything with violence and fear. In the mafia world, violence and fear are the only things that work. Then maybe your world is wrong. Maybe it is, I admitted. But it's the only world I have, and it's the world my daughter is stuck in now whether we like it or not. So I'm going to use every tool I have to keep her safe, even if that makes me the villain in everyone's story. That night, I increased security around the penthouse to military levels. 12 armed guards instead of 6. Biometric scanners on every entrance. Surveillance that covered every approach angle. The building became a fortress, and Jia became a prisoner inside it, even if she didn't fully understand why yet. I found her in her room, looking out the window at a city she couldn't safely explore. She turned when I entered, and those eyes, my eyes, assessed me with that same cold calculation I'd spent decades perfecting. Mom says bad people are coming, Jia said quietly. Mom says we might have to run again because staying here isn't safe anymore. You're not running. Not this time. Why not? Running kept us alive for 5 years. Because I'm here now. And anyone who wants to hurt you has to go through me first. She tilted her head. But what if they go through you? What if they're stronger than you are? The question was delivered with such simple, devastating logic. What if someone was stronger? What if all my power and violence and carefully built empire wasn't enough to protect one small girl who has his eyes? Then I'll make sure taking me down costs them everything they have, I said. And even if they win, they'll wish they hadn't. If you're invested in this story, hit that subscribe button. We post dark, intense stories like this weekly, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Simone made her choice exactly 1 week after the Choice learned about Jia. I came home from eliminating the Trader Park Sungmin to find her packing bags in her room, moving with the efficient speed of someone who'd done this 100 times before. The black woman bodyguard had that look I recognized, the expression of someone who'd made an impossible decision and wouldn't be talked out of it. We're leaving, she said without looking at me. Tonight. I've arranged transport to Singapore, then connections to somewhere the Choice will never find us. You're running again. I'm protecting my daughter again. There's a difference. I leaned against the door frame, watching her pack. You really think running will work this time? The Choice have more resources than whoever found you in Los Angeles. They'll track you down within a month. Then we run again. And again. And again. For as long as it takes. That's not a life, Simone. That's just survival. Survival is all that matters. She spun to face me, and I saw tears tracking down her dark skin. You don't understand. You've never had to understand. For 5 years, I've woken up every single morning wondering if that would be the day someone found us. Wondering if Gia would be kidnapped from her school or killed in her sleep to send you a message you'd never receive because you didn't know she existed. I've lived with that terror every single day, and now it's actually happening. The Mafia danger I ran from in Seoul has followed us here anyway, so I'm taking her and disappearing again because that's what mothers do. We protect our children even when it costs us everything. And what about me? The question came out quieter than I intended. What about you? Simone's voice was hard. You're a Korean mafia boss, Minho. You've built your entire life on violence and power. You don't get to suddenly play concerned father just because reality finally caught up with your choices. She's my daughter. She's been my daughter for 5 years while you were busy running an empire built on other people's fear. You don't get to claim her now just because it's convenient or because seeing her face makes you feel something you'd forgotten how to feel. The words cut deeper than any blade. Because she was right. I'd had no part in raising Gia. Hadn't been there for first words or first steps. Hadn't stayed up nights when she was sick or helped with homework or done any of the 1,000 small things that made someone a parent instead of just a biological contributor. I want to be part of her life, I said. Then leave the mafia world behind. Walk away from the violence and the power and the enemies. Build a legitimate life where Gia can be safe instead of constantly targeted. Choose her over everything else. You know I can't do that. Then you've already chosen. Simone returned to packing. You've chosen your empire over your daughter, just like I knew you would. Just like powerful men always do when forced to decide between control and family. It's not that simple. Yes, it is that simple. You either walk away from the mafia world that makes her a target, or you stay in it and prove that your power matters more than her safety. There's no middle ground, Minho. No compromise that keeps everyone happy. I thought about what she was asking. Walking away from 20 years of careful construction. Abandoning soldiers who'd pledged loyalty to me. Leaving power vacuum that would start a war consuming hundreds of lives. Becoming nobody after being the most feared boss in Seoul. I need time, I said. Time to transition leadership, to ensure stability, to we don't have time. The choice or planning something right now. Every day we stay here is another day closer to Gia being used as leverage against you. Then let me protect you both. Let me use my resources. Your resources are why we're in danger. Her voice cracked. Don't you understand? Being close to you is what makes her a target. The black woman bodyguard who took bullets for you could handle that. Risk. But I'm a mother now, and I won't let my daughter pay the price for your choices. She grabbed the packed bags and walked toward the door. I moved to block her path, not threatening, just present. Please don't take her, I said quietly. I just found out she exists. I just learned I have a daughter who has his eyes and my way of seeing the world. Don't make me lose her before I even get a chance to know her. You should have thought about that before building a life that makes knowing her deadly. Simone, move, Minho. I'm taking Gia and leaving, and you're going to let me because forcing us to stay would just prove you're the monster I've been telling her you are. We stared at each other in that hallway, two people who'd created life together, but couldn't figure out how to protect it together. Everything in me wanted to order my men to seal the building, to prevent her from leaving by force, to keep my daughter here where I could see her and know she was real. But that would be the action of a mafia boss who saw people as possessions to control. And I needed to be something different for Gia. Something better than the man who'd built an empire on fear. Okay, I said, stepping aside. But take this. I handed her a phone encrypted, untraceable, connected directly to my personal line. If the danger finds you again. If you need resources or help or extraction. Call me. No questions asked. No strings attached. Simone took the phone, studying my face like she was trying to understand whether this was manipulation or genuine offering. Why? Because she has his eyes, I said simply. Because she's my daughter, even if I don't know how to be her father. And because letting you both leave might be the most selfish thing I've ever done, but forcing you to stay would be worse. She nodded slowly and walked past me. I followed at a distance as she collected Gia from her room, as they walked to the elevator, as they prepared to vanish from my life as suddenly as they'd appeared in it. Gia looked back at me once before the elevator doors closed. Those eyes, my eyes, studied me with that calculating expression I knew so well. "Are you going to come find us?" she asked. "Would you want me to?" She thought about it seriously. "I don't know yet. Ask me again after you decide who you want to be." Then the doors closed and they were gone. Drop a comment and tell me if you think he made the right choice letting them leave. This is the kind of moral dilemma that has no easy answers. The sacrifice moment came exactly 2 weeks after Simone and Gia disappeared from my life for the second time. I was in a meeting with the other Mafia families who controlled Seoul's underworld, the Choice, the Kims, the Lees. We were negotiating territory disputes that had been simmering for months, power plays that determined who controlled what neighborhoods and shipping routes. This was the game I'd mastered, the world where I'd built my empire, the room where my word carried more weight than most people's guns. But I couldn't focus, couldn't care about territorial boundaries or profit percentages or any of the strategic maneuvering that normally consumed my attention. Because somewhere out there, my daughter who has his eyes was running from dangers I'd created just by existing. Kang Minho. Lee Dongwook's voice cut through my thoughts. "Are you even listening? We're discussing the Busan corridor, which directly affects your operations." "I'm listening," I lied. "Then what's your position on the Kim family's proposal?" I had no idea what proposal he was talking about. Hadn't heard a single word of the last 10 minutes of negotiation. My mind was entirely occupied with questions I couldn't answer. Where had Simone taken Gia? Was the encrypted phone I'd given her charged and accessible? Were the Choice already tracking them somehow? My position, I said slowly, is that I'm stepping back from active operations. Effective immediately. The room went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop onto the conference table. Stepping back. Choi Young-jae leaned forward, his expression calculating. A Korean mafia boss doesn't simply step back. You retire when you're dead or when someone kills you. Those are the only two options in our world. Then I'm creating a third option. Why? It was a simple question with a devastating answer. Because my daughter deserved a father who wasn't constantly creating enemies who'd use her as leverage. Because being the most powerful boss in Seoul meant making my child the most valuable target. Because I'd finally found something that mattered more than power, and keeping both meant losing everything that actually counted. Personal reasons, I said. Not good enough. You don't walk away from 2 decades of operations because of personal reasons. What's really happening, Minho? I looked at Choi Young-jae, the man whose organization had learned about Gia, who'd been planning ways to use my daughter against me. The man who represented everything dangerous about the mafia world I'd helped build and maintain. Someone I care about deserves better than being collateral damage in power games that don't matter, I said. And I'm choosing them over this. Understanding flickered across Choi's face. The child. This is about the child we heard about. Her name is Gia. She's 5 years old. And she has his eyes, my eyes, which means she's marked as mine in a world where being mine makes her a target for every enemy I've ever made. I stood up, placed both hands on the table. I'm done creating enemies who might hurt her to hurt me. I'm done building power that costs her safety. So I'm offering transition. I'll hand over my operations to my second-in-command, Jae-sung. He's capable, loyal, and interested in maintaining the stability that benefits everyone at this table. But I'm out. And if we don't accept this transition? Kim Tae-hyun asked. If we see this as weakness and move against your territories while you're vulnerable? Then you'll discover I'm still capable of burning everything down on my way out, I said calmly. I'm choosing to step back, which is different from becoming weak. Threaten what's mine while I'm managing this transition, and I'll show you exactly why I became the most feared boss in this city. But if you allow me to transfer power peacefully, everyone maintains their territories and profit margins without the chaos that would come from my violent removal. Lee Dongwook studied me carefully. You're serious. You're actually walking away from everything you've built because of one child. I'm walking away because she matters more than any of this. Because being her father, really being her father instead of just the biological source of her DNA, requires becoming someone who doesn't generate enemies planning her kidnapping. Love makes you weak, Choi said quietly. That's what we've all learned in this business. Family is leverage. Caring about anything more than power gets you killed. Maybe I agreed. Or maybe spending decades believing that turned us into monsters who don't know how to be human anymore. Either way, I'm making a different choice now. The meeting continued for 3 more hours. We negotiated terms of transition, established timelines, created agreements ensuring my peaceful exit wouldn't destabilize the entire criminal ecosystem we'd built together. It was strategic, calculated, everything I'd always been good at. Except this time, I was strategically dismantling my own empire instead of expanding it. When I finally left that conference room, I'd sacrificed 20 years of work. Abandoned more power than most people ever dreamed of having. Walked away from being the Korean Mafia boss who controlled Seoul's underworld. But I'd gained something more important, the possibility of becoming someone my daughter wouldn't be afraid to know. Someone who didn't generate the danger that had sent her running. I called the encrypted phone I'd given Simone. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cautious. Minho? I'm out, I said simply. Out of what? The Mafia world. I just negotiated my exit. Jae-sung takes over my operations. I'm transitioning to completely legitimate business. It'll take 6 months to finalize everything, but I'm done creating the danger that made you run. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, why? Because she has his eyes, I said. Because she's my daughter, and she deserves a father who doesn't make her a target. Because you were right, I had to choose between my empire and her safety, and there was never really a choice at all. Minho? Simone's voice cracked. If you're doing this to manipulate us into coming back, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. Whether you come back or not, whether Jia ever wants to know me or not, I needed to stop being the reason you both had to run. Come back or don't. That's your choice. But the danger I represented is being systematically eliminated. Another long silence. Where are you? She finally asked. Heading home to an empty penthouse that feels a lot emptier now that I know what I'm missing. We're in Taipei. Small apartment in a neighborhood where nobody asks questions. Are you safe? For now. The choice haven't found us yet, but it's only a matter of time. It's not, I said. Part of my exit negotiation included guaranteed immunity for you and Jia. The Choi family, the Kims, the Lees, they've all agreed that you're completely off limits. Touching either of you would violate the peace treaty and restart a war nobody wants. You traded your empire for our safety. I traded violence for the possibility of being someone worth knowing. That's not the same thing. If this moment hit you emotionally, smash that like button. Your engagement tells us these character-driven stories are what you want to see. The final confirmation scene happened 3 months after I'd walked away from the Mafia world. Simone and Jia had cautiously returned to Seoul after I'd proven my exit was real and permanent. They lived in a different apartment across the city, maintaining distance while we figured out what kind of relationship was possible between a former Korean Mafia boss and the daughter he'd never known existed. I saw Jia once a week. Supervised visits in neutral locations, parks, museums, Restaurants where we could sit across from each other and try to build something from nothing. She was guarded, careful, still assessing whether I was trustworthy or just another danger wearing a different costume. Today we were at an aquarium, watching sharks circle in their massive tank. Gia stood with her face pressed against the glass, completely absorbed in the way the predators moved through water with that same calculated efficiency I recognized in myself. "They're beautiful," she said quietly. "Most people think they're scary. They're both beautiful and scary at the same time." She turned to look at me with those eyes, my eyes, and I saw something shift in her expression. "Like you." "What do you mean?" "Mom says you used to be scary. That you did terrible things to protect your power. But now you're trying to be different, which makes you both things at once. The person you were and the person you're trying to become. 5 years old and already understanding complexity that most adults never grasped. My daughter had inherited more than just physical features. She'd inherited the ability to see past surface presentations to identify core truth. "Does it scare you?" I asked. "Knowing what I used to be?" Gia thought about it seriously. "Sometimes. But Mom says everyone has scary parts. She says the difference between good people and bad people isn't whether they have scary parts. It's whether they let the scary parts control everything or whether they control the scary parts instead." "Your mother is a very wise woman." "I know." We watched the sharks for another few minutes in comfortable silence. Then Gia reached out and took my hand, the first time she'd voluntarily touched me since that night in the parking garage 3 months ago. Her small hand felt impossibly delicate in mine, like I might accidentally crush something precious if I held on too tight. "Why did you really leave the Mafia world?" she asked. "I told you. To keep you safe. But there are other ways to keep people safe. You could have just hidden us better or given us more guards. Why did you give up all your power?" "Because you have his eyes," I wanted to say. "Because every time you look at me, I see everything I used to be and everything I still could become. Because being your father matters more than being feared by an entire city. Because I wanted to be someone you'd be proud to know," I said instead. "Someone whose legacy wasn't just violence and fear. Someone who chose family over power when it actually mattered." Gia squeezed my hand slightly. "That's a good answer." We walked through the rest of the aquarium together, her hand in mine, this small human who carried my DNA teaching me how to be human again. At the jellyfish exhibit, she stopped suddenly and frowned, and the expression was so exactly like mine that it was almost eerie. That same slight downward turn of the mouth. That same narrowing of the eyes that said she was calculating something complex. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. "I'm thinking that the jellyfish look peaceful, but they're actually dangerous. They have poison that can kill you even though they look pretty and soft." She looked up at me. "That's like the Mafia world, right? It looks powerful and important, but really it's just poison that kills everything it touches." The observation was so precise, so devastatingly accurate, that I couldn't speak for a moment. "Yes," I finally said. "That's exactly what it's like. I'm glad you're not in that world anymore." "Me too." Later, as I was walking them back to their apartment, Gia suddenly stopped on the sidewalk. She stared up at me with those eyes that mirrored mine, studying my face like she was memorizing every detail. "What?" I asked. "You look like me," she said. "Or I look like you." I couldn't see it before because I was scared. But now I can see it. We have the same eyes. She has his eyes. The phrase that had defined our entire relationship from that first moment in the parking garage. But now it meant something different. Not just physical resemblance, but recognition. Connection. The acknowledgement that we were permanently linked through genetics and now, slowly, through choice. "Yes," I said. "We have the same eyes. Does that mean I'm going to be scary like you when I grow up?" "It means you're going to be strong like your mother and strategic like me. What you do with that combination is completely up to you." She nodded slowly, processing this. Then, can I call you something other than Minho? Mom says it's weird that I use your name like we're business associates. My heart did something complicated in my chest. What would you want to call me? I don't know. What do other kids call their fathers? Usually dad. Or father. Or some variation of that. Would it be okay if I called you dad? Even though you weren't my dad for 5 years and you're still kind of new at being my dad now. I knelt down so we were at eye level. Gia, I would be honored if you called me dad. It would be the greatest privilege of my life. She threw her arms around my neck suddenly, fiercely, this small human who has his eyes trusting me enough to be vulnerable. I held her carefully, terrified I might somehow break this perfect moment through clumsiness or saying the wrong thing. I'm glad you chose me over being scary, she whispered into my shoulder. I'm glad I chose you too, I whispered back. When we pulled apart, I saw Simone watching from a few meters away. The black woman bodyguard who'd protected our daughter for 5 years had tears streaming down her dark skin. Thank you, she mouthed silently. For what? I wanted to ask. For finally becoming what I should have been all along? For choosing family over power only after she'd already done all the hard work of keeping Gia alive and hidden? For walking away from violence only when forced to confront the consequences of that violence? But I just nodded, because I understood what she wasn't saying out loud. Thank you for proving that people could change. Thank you for choosing our daughter over your empire. Thank you for becoming someone worth knowing instead of just someone worth fearing. Thank you for showing Gia that having his eyes didn't mean becoming him. Comment below and tell me which moment in this story hit you the hardest. I read every single comment and love hearing what resonates with you all. 6 months after I walked away from being a Korean mafia boss, I'd built something that looked almost like a normal life. Almost. I'd established a legitimate security consulting firm using all the strategic knowledge I'd gained from 2 decades of criminal operations. The work was legal, boring, and paid well enough to maintain comfortable lives for myself and the family I was slowly learning to be part of. Simone had moved into an apartment 3 blocks from mine, close enough that Gia could walk between both places, far enough that we maintained healthy boundaries while figuring out what kind of co-parenting relationship was possible between 2 people who'd created a child during one night and then spent years apart. Gia split her time between both homes. Some nights she stayed with Simone, surrounded by the familiar safety of the mother who'd raised her. Other nights she stayed with me, slowly teaching me how to be a father through patient explanation of things I should have known instinctively but had to learn from scratch. But the mafia world didn't release people easily, even people who'd negotiated clean exits. The danger I'd tried to leave behind followed me like a shadow I couldn't quite shake. It was a Tuesday evening when everything almost fell apart. I was picking Gia up from school, something I'd started doing twice a week, this ordinary father ritual that still felt extraordinary to me. She ran out of the building with her backpack bouncing, that huge smile she only showed when she felt completely safe lighting up her face. "Dad," she yelled, waving. Guess what we learned in science class? She had his eyes, but in moments like this, they held pure childhood joy instead of calculated assessment. She was learning to be a kid instead of a survival machine, and watching that transformation was better than any power I'd ever held. That's when I saw the car. Black sedan, tinted windows, moving too slowly through the pickup zone. Professional surveillance, not parents collecting children. My old instincts activated immediately. I moved fast, positioning myself between Gia and the vehicle, my hand going automatically to where I used to carry a gun before legitimate life meant being unarmed. The sedan's window rolled down. Choi Young-jae looked out at me, his expression unreadable. Relax, Minho. I'm not here to break our agreement. Then why are you here at my daughter's school? Because I wanted to see if you'd really changed. If walking away from the mafia world was genuine transformation or just strategic repositioning. His eyes moved to Jia, who was watching this interaction with that sharp intelligence she'd inherited from me. She has his eyes. Everyone was right about that. She's off limits, I said quietly. We had an agreement. I'm not here to threaten her. I'm here to tell you that your exit worked. The power vacuum you left was filled without major violence. Jae-sung has proven to be a capable leader who maintains stability. Your transition was successful. Why tell me this? Because some of us in the Mafia world wondered if what you did was possible. If someone could actually walk away and build something different. You proved it could be done. Choi looked at Jia again. Treasure her. The rest of us in this life will never have what you have now. We'll die the way we've lived, surrounded by power, but completely alone. The sedan pulled away, leaving me standing there with my heart racing and my daughter looking up at me with concern. Was that a bad man? Jia asked quietly. Yes, but he's not going to hurt us. How do you know? Because he understands that you're more valuable to me than anything he could offer or threaten. And because hurting you would start a war he can't win. She thought about this seriously. But you're not in the Mafia world anymore. How could you start a war? Because walking away from that world didn't make me weak, Jia. It just changed what I'm willing to fight for. Before, I fought for power and territory and reputation. Now I fight for you. And fighting for you makes me far more dangerous than I ever was before. Because love is stronger than power? Because love gives you something worth protecting. Power is just something you accumulate. But love is something you'd burn the entire world down to keep safe. We walked to my car together, her small hand in mine. She was quiet, processing everything she'd witnessed. Dad, she finally said. Yeah. Are you still scary? I thought about the question. About the man I used to be and the man I was trying to become. About the violence I was still capable of if pushed, and the choice I made every day to be something different. Sometimes I admitted. But I'm learning to only be scary when protecting people I love instead of being scary all the time. Does that make sense? Yeah, like a guard dog instead of a wild animal. Exactly like that. That night, after tucking Jia into bed in my apartment, I sat with Simone on my balcony overlooking the city I used to control. The black woman who'd taken bullets for me, who'd protected our daughter alone for 5 years, who'd given me a chance to become someone worth knowing. Choi showed up at Jia's school today, I said. Simone tensed immediately. What happened? Nothing. He just wanted to confirm I'd really left the Mafia world behind. To see if the transformation was genuine. And what did he conclude? That it was. That walking away actually worked. We sat in silence for a while, watching lights twinkle in the darkness below. Seoul at night was still beautiful, even without the power I used to wield over large portions of it. Do you regret it? Simone asked quietly. Giving up everything you'd built? Every single day, I admitted. And then I see Jia smile, or hear her call me dad, or watch her slowly stop being a survival machine and start being a child, and I remember why I made the choice. Power was impressive. Being feared was effective. But being her father is the only thing I've ever done that actually matters. She loves you, you know. She's scared to say it out loud yet, but she does. I love her too. In a way I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. And us. Simone gestured between us. What are we exactly? I don't know. 2 people who created something beautiful during one night and then spent years apart because staying together would have gotten you killed. 2 people trying to figure out if we can be partners in raising our daughter even though we barely know each other anymore. Would you want to know me again? Really know me. Not just coordinate parenting schedules and maintain polite distance. I looked at her, this woman who'd sacrificed comfortable life to protect a child from the danger I represented. This black woman bodyguard who'd been strong enough to survive 5 years alone and brave enough to give me a chance to change. Yes, I said. I'd like that. If you're willing to risk knowing a former Korean mafia boss who's still figuring out how to be normal. Normal is overrated, she said with a slight smile. I'll settle for honest and trying. I can do honest and trying. Then maybe we have a chance. 3 years later, I stood in Jia's school gymnasium watching her perform in her third-grade play. She'd auditioned for the lead role and gotten it through talent and confidence that came from finally feeling safe enough to shine. Simone sat beside me, our relationship having evolved into something that looked almost like partnership built on shared love for the child we'd created. Jia spotted us in the crowd and waved, then delivered her lines with perfect timing. She had his eyes, my eyes, but they sparkled with joy instead of cold calculation.